My hano dato du gemelle Apache come schiave, ma io laho liberate. It was a quiet morning when he first saw them. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. The village was calm, and the air carried the fresh smell of earth and dew. He had been given a task that morning, one that seemed simple on paper but felt heavy in his heart. Two young girls, twins, had been entrusted to him. They were Apache, children of a proud people whose land had been taken and whose lives had been changed forever. They were not prisoners in the usual sense. They were treated as property, as if their spirits and choices did not matter. But from the moment he laid eyes on them, he knew that they were more than that. The twins stood together, side by side, their small hands gripping each other tightly. Their eyes were wide, curious, but cautious, as if they were trying to read him before deciding whether to trust. One had hair as dark as midnight, and the other's hair shone with a faint reddish glow in the sunlight. Their faces were alike in many ways, yet there was something in the way each carried herself that made them distinct. One had a quiet strength, a serious and thoughtful expression, while the other had a spark, a flicker of mischief and curiosity that peeked through her fear. He noticed the way they moved, careful and wary, as though every step had to be calculated to avoid danger. He had met many people in his life, some kind, some cruel, but the look in their eyes was different. It was not just fear, it was the fire of resilience, a quiet but unbroken spirit that refused to be crushed. That spirit fascinated him, and at the same time, it reminded him of how fragile life could be for those who had no freedom. For a moment, he simply watched them, unsure of what to say. How do you speak to someone who has been told they are less than human? How do you offer comfort when the world itself has been unkind to them? He wanted to bridge that gap, to let them know that he was not like the others. But trust could not be forced. It had to be earned. So he started slowly, speaking softly, his words careful, gentle, like the first notes of a song that must be sung softly before it can be loud. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Thomas." He gave them a small nod, a gesture meant to show that he came with no immediate threat. The twins exchanged a glance, one raising an eyebrow as if questioning him silently, while the other looked away, uncertain. He noticed the slight trembling in their hands, the way they shifted their weight from one foot to another. They had learned to be cautious, to anticipate danger before it arrived. Days passed, and each day he learned a little more about them. He learned that they liked the same foods, that they were curious about the world beyond their small village, and that they had dreams that were bigger than the walls that confined them. The older villagers called them property and gifts, but he saw something else entirely. He saw children who deserved laughter, play, and choice. He saw human beings with hearts, minds, and a capacity for hope. And slowly, the walls around their hearts began to show cracks, tiny openings that allowed him to reach in. He started with small acts of kindness. A shared meal, a story told by the fire, a gentle word when one of the twins seemed afraid. He did not force them to speak, but he did offer conversation, letting them know that listening was not the same as judgment. And little by little, the twins began to respond. One morning, the more playful twin smiled at him when he handed her a piece of bread. It was a small thing, almost invisible to an outsider, but to him, it meant everything. That smile was a message. "I am beginning to trust you." The bond that formed was quiet at first, but it grew stronger with every shared glance, every word spoken with care, every moment of understanding. He learned their names, Lela and Ayana, and the way they spoke their language, soft and melodic, filled him with a sense of awe. These were girls with histories, stories, and connections that went beyond the world they now lived in. He realized that to protect them, to truly help them, he had to understand them, not just as children in need, but as people with culture, pride, and intelligence. One afternoon, he took them to the edge of the village, where the forest began. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting patterns on the ground like a natural tapestry. He spoke to them about the trees, about the birds, about the world beyond the village. At first they listened quietly, shyly, but then questions began to trickle out. "What is that bird?" asked Lela, pointing to a bright red cardinal. "Can we go there?" Yana asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. He answered patiently, showing them the colors, the movements, the life that existed beyond their immediate reality. It was in these moments, when the world seemed larger and more alive, that he began to understand the depth of their suffering. Life had been taken from them in small but constant ways, the choice of where to go, what to say, what to wear. He thought about his own life and the freedoms he often took for granted, and a deep sense of responsibility settled in his chest. These girls were not merely entrusted to him, they depended on him to see their worth and to honor it. Night brought its own challenges. The girls were afraid of the dark, of the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees, of shadows that moved in ways they could not understand. He stayed with them, telling stories to keep their minds occupied, humming soft songs that had been passed down in his own family. He learned their favorite stories, told them over and over, and in return, they shared tales of their people, legends of courage, spirits, and ancestors who had once walked freely across the land. As the nights passed, he began to notice something extraordinary. The twins were not broken. They were resilient, intelligent, and remarkably perceptive. They had survived a world that demanded obedience and submission, yet they still retained the ability to dream, to hope, and to imagine. He was humbled by their strength and inspired by their courage. And in that inspiration, he found the first stirrings of a plan, an idea that had seemed impossible at first. Maybe, just maybe, he could help them find true freedom. But freedom was not simple. The laws and customs that kept the twins in their place were strong, backed by fear, tradition, and power. To defy them would be dangerous, perhaps even deadly. And yet, he could not ignore the injustice he saw. He could not look at these girls, these twins who were as much his responsibility as any family he had ever known, and pretend that their suffering was acceptable. His mind wrestled with fear and hope, with caution and courage, and in the quiet of the night he made a silent promise. He would do everything he could to help them, no matter the cost. The days continued, filled with small victories and gentle moments of connection. He taught them to recognize safe paths through the village, to notice patterns in the movements of people around them, and to trust their instincts. They began to smile more, to laugh quietly at small jokes, to run along the edges of the forest without fear. And every time he saw that spark of joy, he felt a surge of determination. Their freedom, he realized, was not just a possibility, it was a responsibility, a mission that he could not abandon. And so, part one of their journey ended not with a dramatic escape or a triumphant victory, but with quiet understanding, trust, and the first flickers of hope. The twins were no longer just children entrusted to him. They were friends, allies, and partners in a dream that seemed fragile but real. And as the sun set, casting long shadows over the village, he knew that the days ahead would test them all. But for the first time, he felt that freedom was not just a word. It was a goal, a promise, and a guiding light that would shape the journey to come. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the twins and Thomas grew stronger. Lela and Ayana were still cautious, still measuring every word, every glance, but the walls they had built around themselves began to show small cracks. Trust was never immediate, and he understood that. It had to be earned, slowly and with patience. He learned that every day offered a new lesson, about them, about himself, and about the quiet power of hope. He started to notice the differences between the twins more clearly. Lela, the more serious of the two, often observed everything with a sharp, calculating eye. She would notice small details, the way a bird perched, the direction of the wind, the pattern of footsteps near the village's edge. She was cautious, careful, and thoughtful, a girl who understood the importance of planning and preparation. Gianna, on the other hand, had a lively energy that could not be hidden. Her curiosity was boundless, her questions endless, and her laughter, though quiet, had a way of lighting even the dullest corners of the day. Together they were a balance, caution and curiosity, strength and spirit, heart and mind. Thomas found joy in discovering their personalities. He asked questions gently, never pressing too hard. "What do you like to do?" he would ask. Lela might give a short, precise answer, while Ayana would talk in bursts of excitement, her eyes sparkling as she tried to describe things that were familiar to her world. They told him about their lives before being taken from their home, stories of a land filled with wide skies, flowing rivers, and families who had loved them deeply. Their memories were bittersweet, filled with happiness but also pain, but they spoke of them with a courage that surprised him. He began to teach them small things, not as lessons but as games. How to read the sky to know if it would rain, how to listen to the forest for hidden signs of movement, and how to recognize patterns in nature. At first, they were hesitant, unsure if learning these things was safe, but slowly, their confidence grew. Thomas realized that education was not just about knowledge, it was about empowerment. Each skill they learned was a tiny step toward reclaiming the freedom that had been stolen from them. The twins also began to teach him. They showed him how to make simple, natural remedies for minor injuries, how to tie knots that could be used for many purposes, and even how to move silently through the forest without drawing attention. Thomas marveled at their intelligence and resilience. They were children who had faced unimaginable circumstances, and yet had retained the ability to adapt, learn, and survive. Every lesson they shared was a reminder that they were not powerless. They were alive, aware, and capable. One afternoon, Thomas took them to a quiet spot by a river, a place hidden from the view of anyone passing by. The water ran clear and cool, reflecting the sunlight in shimmering patterns. He asked them to close their eyes and listen, to feel the flow of the river and the movement of the wind. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Lela and Ayana sat quietly, absorbing the sounds and sensations. Thomas watched them and realized that moments like these were more than just exercises. They were opportunities for the twins to connect with themselves, to remember that the world was bigger than fear and control. He also noticed moments of playfulness, small signs that their spirits were beginning to heal. Ayana would sometimes pretend to be a bird, flapping her arms and making soft, joyful sounds. Lela would often watch with a faint smile, occasionally joining in with careful movements. These moments, though small, were victories. They were proof that the girls were reclaiming pieces of themselves, that their spirits were not completely broken. And for Thomas, seeing them like this strengthened his resolve. If they could find joy in such simple things, then freedom was not just a dream, it was something possible. But the world outside their small circle was not kind. The village around them was filled with people who saw the twins as property, not as children. Thomas had to be careful, constantly aware of who was watching and listening. Every interaction, every step had to be measured. The twins learned to read these situations quickly. They would freeze when someone suspicious approached or retreat to safer areas when necessary. It was exhausting at times, but each day they grew a little stronger, a little more confident in their ability to navigate a world that had often been cruel. Trust, Thomas realized, was not just about protecting them from the outside. It was about listening, understanding, and giving them a voice. He encouraged them to speak about their fears, their dreams, and their memories. They would often talk late into the evening by the fire, sharing stories in quiet whispers. Sometimes Lela spoke first, carefully choosing her words, and Ayana would follow, speaking with more emotion and passion. These conversations became a bridge between them, a way to build a connection that went beyond survival. Through words, They were reclaiming some of the power that had been taken from them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ayanna asked a question that took Thomas by surprise. "Do you think we will ever see our home again?" Her voice was small, almost fragile, but filled with hope. Lella looked at her twin, then at Thomas, her eyes reflecting the same longing. Thomas did not answer immediately. He felt the weight of the truth. Returning home might not be possible, but he could help them find freedom in another way. He knelt down to their level and said, "I don't know what the future holds, but I promise you this. I will do everything I can to help you be free, to make sure you are safe, and to help you live your lives with choice." That promise, simple as it was, seemed to strengthen their bond even further. The twins leaned slightly toward him, a small gesture of trust, a silent acknowledgement that they believed in him, at least in part. It was a fragile trust, still delicate and careful, but it was there. And for Thomas, it was enough to give him hope. Hope that their story could be different, that their lives could be more than what the world had forced upon them. As the days passed, Thomas noticed small changes in their behavior. Lella began to take initiative, exploring the forest edges and pointing out dangers before they became problems. Ayanna became bolder, asking questions about the world and imagining possibilities beyond the village. Their personalities flourished, no longer hidden behind fear. Thomas felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. He knew that helping them grow was only part of his duty. He also had to prepare for the challenges that lay ahead, the obstacles that could threaten their safety at any moment. The twins also taught him about resilience in ways he had not expected. They had endured loss, displacement, and fear, yet they continued to smile, to laugh, and to dream. Watching them navigate their new reality with courage inspired Thomas to be more determined, more careful, and more compassionate. He realized that freedom was not just about leaving a place. It was about building confidence, self-worth, and hope. And that was what he wanted to give them most of all. One morning, Thomas found the twins practicing small survival skills. Lella was carefully examining a path through the forest, noting landmarks and making mental maps. Ayanna was gathering small sticks, learning to make simple tools and games. He watched them in awe. They were learning, adapting, and taking steps toward independence, even if the world still tried to hold them back. Thomas realized that their growth was a sign of something bigger. The human spirit could survive even in the harshest conditions, and sometimes it was those who had been treated as weak who proved the strongest. Through every challenge, every quiet moment, Thomas felt the weight of his responsibility. Protecting the twins was more than a task. It was a moral duty, a choice to act when others would stand by. And he knew that the decisions he made now would shape not only their immediate safety, but also the course of their lives. Every action, every word, every plan had to be carefully considered. The world outside was not forgiving, but with patience, courage, and trust, he could guide them toward something better. By the end of part 2, the twins had begun to blossom under his care. Their trust in him was growing, their personalities shining brighter, and their hope for freedom taking root. And Thomas, too, had changed. He had become more aware of the fragility and strength of life, of the importance of compassion, and of the power of patience and trust. Together, they were forming a bond that would carry them through the challenges to come, a bond built on understanding, respect, and shared hope for a better future. As the days passed, Thomas noticed the world outside their quiet circle becoming more pressing, more dangerous. The village, with its strict rules and unyielding expectations, continued to watch and judge. The twins, Lella and Ayanna, were growing more confident under his care, but the people around them did not see them as children who deserved freedom and joy. They saw property, possessions, something to control. Thomas felt the weight of the difference pressing on his chest like a heavy stone. He realized that keeping them safe would not be enough. Their lives were still constrained by invisible walls, walls built by fear, tradition, and cruelty. The villagers were alert, always observing, and any slip could bring punishment not only to the twins but to him as well. Thomas wrestled with his conscience daily. Every choice felt dangerous, yet he could not ignore the injustice before him. He could not stand by while two young girls, so full of life and potential, were treated as less than human. One evening, after the sun had dipped behind the hills and the sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, Thomas sat with the twins by the fire. They were quieter than usual, sensing his unease. Lela noticed first, tilting her head and asking softly, "Are they watching us again?" Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of worry in her eyes. Iana looked at Thomas, her expression questioning, sensing that something important weighed on him. Thomas took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Yes," he said gently. "They are always watching, always expecting us to obey, but we have each other and that is important. You are stronger than you know, and together we can face this." He tried to offer reassurance, though inside, he felt the tension tightening around his chest. Every plan he made had risks, and the risk of being discovered was growing every day. The twins were beginning to understand the realities of their situation more clearly. Lela, ever cautious, noticed small changes in the village. Guards seemed more attentive, whispers followed them wherever they went, and strangers' eyes lingered too long on the girls. She shared these observations with Thomas, who nodded, feeling both pride and fear. The twins were learning, growing smarter with each passing day, but awareness also brought a heavier burden. They were no longer innocent children untouched by danger. They understood that their safety depended on vigilance, careful thinking, and the courage to act when needed. Thomas spent hours weighing his options. He wanted freedom for them, but freedom was not simple. The laws and customs that governed the village were strict, and defiance could bring severe punishment. Yet, he could not continue living in quiet complicity, knowing that the twins' lives were limited by rules that made no sense and justice that did not exist. His mind often wandered into dark possibilities, imagining being caught, punished, or worse. But even these fears could not outweigh his moral certainty. He had to act, and he had to plan carefully. He began to think about the future, imagining a way for the twins to live safely, to run free, to explore the world beyond the village. The vision was fragile, filled with unknowns, but it was a light in the dark. He sketched plans in his mind, considering routes through the forest, hiding places, and methods to avoid detection. At night, he would whisper ideas into the quiet, sometimes waking the twins gently to share a thought or ask for their opinion. They were cautious listeners, yet their input mattered. After all, their instincts and knowledge of the village and surroundings were invaluable. The twins also sensed that something was shifting. Yana's usual playfulness was tempered by curiosity tinged with worry. "What happens if we get caught?" she asked one night, her small hands clutching the edge of the blanket. Thomas knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Then we keep trying," he said. "We learn from it, we adapt, and we try again. Freedom is not easy, but it is worth it." His words seemed to settle something inside her. She nodded, her determination soft but present. Lela, sitting quietly nearby, simply reached out to touch his shoulder, a silent agreement that they were ready to trust him, even in the face of danger. Despite the risks, Thomas found strength in their courage. Their small acts of bravery inspired him to continue, to think more creatively, and to remain vigilant. They practiced moving quietly through the forest edges, learning to recognize patterns in the village's patrols, and memorizing safe spaces that could serve as temporary shelters if needed. These exercises were both practical and symbolic. They were reclaiming control over their own lives, bit by bit, and Thomas watched with admiration as they transformed from frightened children into resourceful and perceptive allies. But the village was never far from danger. Thomas saw the harsh realities of their world every day. Children were not always treated with care, and adults often acted out of fear, greed, or cruelty. Thomas knew that the twins' survival depended not only on planning, but on understanding the people around them. He spent time teaching them to read expressions, to notice intentions in voices, and to anticipate actions before they occurred. These lessons were not easy, but the twins absorbed them with a quiet resilience that amazed him. There were nights when Thomas lay awake, listening to the soft breathing of Lela and Ayana in the room beside him, thinking about what lay ahead. He worried constantly about their safety, about the choices he would have to make, and about the consequences of failure. But he also felt a sense of purpose stronger than fear. He was no longer just a caretaker. He was their protector, their guide, and in a way, their partner in a dream of freedom. Every decision he made had to balance caution and courage, and he was learning to do so with patience and care. One day, while observing the village, Thomas noticed a small opportunity. A guard had changed shifts, leaving a section of the path less watched than usual. It was a minor detail, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but he saw it as a chance to teach the twins about careful timing and observation. He took them to a quiet corner and explained the importance of watching, waiting, and understanding patterns. Lela absorbed the lesson quickly, her eyes sharp and focused, while Ayana, though nervous, followed his instructions carefully. The exercise was a small success, but it was significant. It showed them that freedom, even in small ways, could be practiced and achieved. The twins began to ask questions about the wider world beyond the village. "Is it always dangerous out there?" Lela asked one evening. Thomas smiled softly, considering how to answer. "The world has both danger and beauty," he said. "It is a place where you must be careful, but it is also full of wonder, friendship, and things worth seeing. The key is to learn to trust yourself and to be brave when you need to be." Jana leaned closer, her eyes wide. "We want to see it," she whispered. Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. The dream of freedom was no longer abstract, it was real, and it had to be planned carefully. Tension grew as the twins' awareness of their surroundings increased. They noticed suspicious villagers, overheard hushed conversations about rules and restrictions, and sensed that change was needed. Thomas guided them gently, teaching them to stay calm, to assess threats, and to plan quietly. Each small lesson brought them closer together as a team, building trust and confidence that would be essential in the days to come. By the end of this part of the story, the foundations for action were laid. The twins had grown more confident, more perceptive, and more ready to participate in their own journey. Thomas had become a steady guide, balancing courage, patience, and careful observation. The risks of the world outside were clear, but so too was the possibility of change. Together, they were ready to face what came next. The days of learning, observing, and building trust were over. The next step, freedom itself, was approaching, and with it, the trials, courage, and determination that would test them all. The day finally came when Thomas knew that waiting was no longer an option. He had planned carefully, observed the village, and watched the routines of the guards and villagers alike. Every detail mattered: the timing of shifts, the places where people gathered, and even the smallest patterns of daily life. Lela and Ayana had grown confident and capable, their awareness of danger heightened by weeks of careful guidance. They were no longer simply children to be protected, they were partners in the plan. Thomas gathered the twins quietly in a hidden corner near the edge of the forest. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the village and painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. The moment was calm, almost peaceful, but beneath that calm was the tension of what they were about to do. Each step carried risk, and any mistake could have severe consequences. Thomas looked at the twins, who met his gaze with quiet determination. There was no fear in their eyes now, only focus and trust. "Tonight we move," he whispered. "Stay close to me, follow my lead, and remember everything we practiced. We are ready." Lela nodded, her hands gripping tightly to Ayana's. Yana, her usual spark softened by concentration, gave a small smile. The bond between them had never been stronger. It was a bond built on trust, respect, and the shared understanding that their lives depended on careful, coordinated action. They moved slowly through the village, sticking to shadows and hidden paths. Every sound, every movement was noticed. Thomas had taught them to walk quietly, to step lightly, and to read the world around them. Even the smallest detail, a loose stone on a path, a window left open, or the creak of a door, could give them information about danger or opportunity. The twins followed his lead, matching his movements with careful precision. It was not just a physical journey. It was a test of patience, observation, and courage. As they neared the first obstacle, a narrow bridge over a small stream, Thomas paused. The bridge creaked with each step, and the water below shimmered in the fading light. Lela and Ayana froze, waiting for instructions. Thomas whispered softly, "Step lightly, one at a time. Move slowly and do not look down if it frightens you." One by one they crossed, their movements careful but steady. The forest beyond the bridge was darker, but it promised safety and the beginning of true freedom. Once they reached the trees, Thomas signaled for them to rest briefly. The twins sat quietly, breathing in the cool, earthy air. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the soft hum of insects. It was a world different from the village, one that belonged neither to the villagers nor to their oppressors. Thomas looked at the twins, feeling pride and awe. They had endured so much, and now, step by step, they were reclaiming their lives. But danger was never far away. The village was not empty, and it would not take long for their absence to be noticed. Thomas knew they had to move quickly but carefully. He led the twins along a narrow, winding path, avoiding main roads and places where travelers might appear. They used the skills they had practiced, listening to the forest, observing patterns, and moving with precision. Lela noticed the subtle signs of people following, and Ayana quietly held his hand, trusting his judgment completely. Every small action mattered, and every decision could mean the difference between success and failure. At one point, a distant shout echoed through the trees. Thomas froze, signaling the twins to do the same. Voices from the village had noticed their absence, and the sound carried. Heartbeats quickened, but Thomas remained calm, guiding them to a small hollow between trees where they could hide. The twins crouched low, holding their breath, listening to the approaching sounds. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with tension. And then slowly the voices faded, moving past their hiding place. Relief washed over them, but it was tempered by the understanding that their journey was far from over. After that close call, Thomas adjusted their path, taking them deeper into the forest. The terrain became rougher, with fallen branches and uneven ground, but the twins moved with growing confidence. They remembered the lessons he had taught them, using their eyes and ears to anticipate danger. At one point, Ayana spotted a small animal moving quickly across the path and pointed it out to Lela. "It's okay," Thomas said softly. "Even the smallest signs matter. They teach us to pay attention." The twins nodded, understanding that survival required awareness, patience, and teamwork. As night fell completely, the forest became darker, yet Thomas felt a sense of relief. They had left the village behind, and with it, the immediate threat of capture. But he also knew that freedom required more than simply leaving. It required skill, courage, and constant vigilance. He taught the twins to navigate using the stars and the moon, showing them how to recognize landmarks and directions even in the darkness. Lela quickly grasped the logic, noting patterns in the trees and ground. Gianna, although less methodical, relied on intuition and observation, often noticing things that Thomas might have missed. Together, they formed a team, each complementing the other's strengths. At one point, they came to a small clearing where they could rest briefly and eat. Thomas had brought some food, simple but nourishing, and the twins ate quietly, conserving energy for the journey ahead. The forest around them was alive, but no threat seemed immediate. In that moment, they allowed themselves a small measure of comfort. Lella leaned against a tree, Ayana humming softly, and Thomas watched them with a mix of relief and pride. The twins had faced fear with courage, and each step taken had brought them closer to the freedom they had been denied for so long. But as they moved on, the tension returned. Thomas knew that the journey was far from over. The forest was vast and dangers, both natural and human, could appear without warning. He taught the twins to stay close, to move quietly, and to anticipate every possibility. Lella began to take initiative, pointing out paths and obstacles, while Ayana remained alert, noticing even the slightest change in the environment. Their trust in Thomas and in each other was absolute. Every action was coordinated, every movement deliberate, and every decision carried weight. As the night progressed, they came to a small river. The current was gentle, but the water was cold and deep enough to pose a challenge. Thomas led them carefully, choosing the safest crossing point. He showed them how to test the depth and move cautiously across slippery stones. Lella followed closely, her careful movements precise, while Ayana relied on instinct and courage. Once across, they paused to catch their breath, each feeling a growing sense of accomplishment. They had faced obstacles, danger, and fear, yet they had moved forward together, stronger and more determined than ever. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, they had reached a secluded area far from the village. The forest opened slightly, revealing a small meadow bathed in soft morning light. Thomas, Lella, and Ayana stood together, exhausted but triumphant. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to fully breathe, to feel the safety and possibility that the open space represented. They were still far from complete freedom, but the journey had brought them closer than ever before. Thomas looked at the twins, feeling a deep sense of pride. "We are not safe yet," he said softly, "but we have made it further than many would have thought possible. Each step we take is a step toward freedom, and each decision we make brings us closer to the life we deserve." Lella and Ayana nodded, their eyes bright with determination. The forest around them was quiet, alive, and full of possibilities. And in that moment, they felt a sense of hope that had been absent for too long. The escape had been dangerous, tense, and exhausting, but it had also been a moment of transformation. The twins had proven their courage, skill, and resourcefulness, while Thomas had learned the depth of responsibility, trust, and moral courage required to guide them. Together, they had navigated fear, danger, and uncertainty, emerging stronger, closer, and more determined than ever. The journey ahead would still be challenging, but they had taken the first decisive step toward true freedom, a step that required patience, bravery, and unwavering trust. As they rested in the meadow, Thomas thought about what lay ahead. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, and perhaps even moments of doubt. But the bond they had formed, the trust and courage they had nurtured, would guide them. The twins were no longer simply victims of circumstance. They were active participants in their own destiny, capable, resilient, and strong. And Thomas knew that together, they could face whatever lay ahead, moving steadily toward a future filled with choice, hope, and freedom. The first light of morning filtered through the trees as Thomas, Lella, and Ayana walked slowly, their bodies tired but their spirits lighter than they had been in weeks. The forest had protected them through the night, offering shadows and shelter when danger had seemed closest. Now, with the sun rising, the world seemed more open, more alive, and more full of possibility. For the first time, the twins felt what it might mean to live without constant fear. Thomas led them carefully toward a small clearing he had discovered on his earlier explorations, a place secluded from the village, hidden from anyone who might search for them. The ground was soft with moss and grass, and a gentle stream ran nearby, sparkling in the early light. Birds called to one another in the trees, and a cool breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh water. It was quiet, peaceful, and safe, and Thomas hoped it could be their first place of true rest. The twins sat down by the stream, their hands still gripping each other in quiet solidarity. Lella's eyes were sharp and alert, always observing, always thinking, but there was a softness now, a moment of relief. Yana, more expressive by nature, allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the cool air fill her lungs and the sunlight warm her face. The fear that had followed them for so long seemed, at least for this moment, to fade. Thomas sat beside them, watching quietly, letting them enjoy the calm before continuing the journey ahead. "This place," Thomas said softly, "can be a safe beginning. We will stay here for a little while, rest, and plan the next steps. Freedom is not just about leaving the village. It is about building a life where you can be yourselves, where no one tells you what to do, and where you can grow strong." The twins listened carefully, absorbing his words. They understood now that freedom was more than escape. It was choice, safety, and the chance to live fully. Over the next few days, Thomas and the twins settled into a small routine. They gathered food, explored the surrounding forest, and learned to identify safe paths and places to rest. Each day brought new lessons, but also new joy. Lella, ever observant, began to take note of edible plants, safe hiding spots, and natural landmarks that could guide them. Yana, filled with energy and curiosity, explored the trees and streams, discovering patterns in nature and ways to move gracefully and quietly. Together, they practiced skills that would help them live independently, skills that gave them confidence and a sense of control over their lives. Thomas also took time to teach them about hope, patience, and resilience. He told stories of people who had faced impossible odds but had persevered, using cleverness, courage, and determination. Lella and Ayana listened with wide eyes, imagining themselves as brave characters in their own story, capable of overcoming whatever challenges lay ahead. These lessons were as important as any survival skill. They reminded the twins that freedom was as much about the mind and heart as it was about the body. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees and the sky glowed with soft pinks and purples, Ayana spoke quietly. "Do you think we will ever see our family again?" Her voice was full of longing, a question that had been in her heart for as long as she could remember. Thomas knelt beside her, taking her hands gently in his. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But what I do know is that you can live your lives freely now. You can be safe, happy, and strong. The past will always be part of you, but the future is yours to shape." Lella nodded, a small smile forming on her face. Though there was sadness in their hearts, there was also a new kind of hope, a hope that they could build their lives on their own terms. As the days passed, Thomas helped the twins build a small shelter using branches and leaves, a simple but sturdy space where they could sleep safely and rest. They learned to start small fires for warmth and cooking, and to collect clean water from the stream. Each task they completed filled them with a sense of accomplishment and independence. No longer were they passive victims of circumstance. They were active participants in creating a safe, sustainable life. Their confidence grew with each success, and their laughter began to return, soft and musical, filling the quiet forest with life. The forest itself became a teacher. The twins learned to recognize tracks of animals, the patterns of the wind, and the changes in the weather. They noticed the small details that Thomas had taught them to observe. The way moss grew on trees to indicate direction, the subtle sounds of movement nearby, and the stars that could guide them at night. Lela and Ayana were becoming attuned to the world in ways that few children could. They were learning not just to survive, but to thrive, building a connection with the earth that was grounding and empowering. Thomas also encouraged the twins to dream about the future. They spoke of places they wanted to see, activities they wanted to try, and the people they hoped to meet. Lela wanted to explore distant hills and forests, to learn more about the plants and animals of the world. Yana dreamed of laughter, games, and perhaps finding other children who were free like them. Thomas listened, smiling, and reminded them that these dreams were possible because they had taken the first steps toward freedom. The forest, once a place of hiding, was now a place of learning, growth, and possibility. Over time, the twins also developed a sense of community with Thomas. He was no longer just a protector or guide. He was a companion, a mentor, and a friend. Their shared experiences, from fear and danger to learning and laughter, had created a bond that was strong and unbreakable. Trust, once fragile, had transformed into confidence and understanding. The three of them moved together as a team, each aware of the other's strengths, weaknesses, and needs. Together they had survived, and together they would continue to build a life filled with safety, joy, and freedom. One morning, as they explored further from their shelter, they stumbled upon a small field of wildflowers. The colors were vibrant, yellows, blues, and purples waving gently in the breeze. Iana ran into the field, twirling with her arms outstretched, laughing freely. Lela followed more cautiously, but soon she too allowed herself to enjoy the moment. Thomas watched them with pride, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time, he saw them truly free, able to experience joy without fear, able to breathe without the weight of oppression pressing down on them. Yet, freedom also came with reflection. The twins often spoke of their past, of their family, and of the village they had left behind. Thomas listened, offering comfort and understanding, reminding them that their past was part of them, but it did not define them. They were not powerless anymore. They were alive, strong, and capable of shaping their own future. Each conversation, each memory shared, strengthened their resilience and gave them tools to face challenges with courage and wisdom. As days turned into weeks, the twins' confidence and independence flourished. They moved with ease through the forest, finding food, gathering firewood, and even creating small, clever traps to catch fish for meals. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, was celebrated quietly with smiles and laughter. Thomas felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that their growth and freedom were tangible, real, and hard-earned. He had guided them, yes, but they had taken every step with courage and determination, proving that strength and resilience were theirs by right. One evening, as the sun set in golden light and the world seemed calm and peaceful, Thomas sat with Lela and Ayana by the stream. He spoke gently about the journey they had taken together, from fear to freedom, from doubt to trust, from uncertainty to hope. The twins listened, their eyes bright, absorbing every word. They had survived danger, learned skills, and reclaimed control over their lives. Now they were free, not just in body but in spirit. Yana leaned her head against Thomas' shoulder, her voice soft but full of emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Lela nodded silently, her eyes shining with gratitude. Thomas felt the weight of their journey settle in his heart. It had been dangerous, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. But in this moment, every risk, every careful decision, every moment of patience and teaching had been worth it. They had survived together, and they had created the possibility of a new life. In the weeks that followed, the trio continued to explore, learn, and grow. Thomas guided the twins, but he also allowed them space to make their own choices, to exercise their independence, and to feel the empowerment that comes with self-determination. Lela and Ayana were thriving, no longer defined by fear or the limitations imposed on them by others. They were free, strong, and filled with hope, a hope that would guide them through the rest of their lives. By the time the first season changed and the forest became lush with new growth, the twins were unrecognizable from the frightened children who had first been entrusted to Thomas. They were confident, resourceful, and capable. Their laughter filled the forest, their curiosity led them to discover new wonders, and their hearts carried the knowledge that they had overcome fear, danger, and oppression. Thomas watched them with pride, knowing that they were ready for whatever the future might hold. In the end, freedom was not a single moment. It was a process, a journey, and a series of choices that had been made with courage and care. The twins had walked that path, step by step with Thomas as their guide, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever. Their lives were no longer constrained by fear but filled with possibility. And as they looked to the future, the world seemed open, alive, and waiting for them to write their own story.